right, good morning, and welcome back to Thompson Hine's Coffee Chat series. My name is Cassandra Borchers. I'm a partner at Thompson Hines in our investment management practice group. And I'm also chair of the Blockchain and Cryptocurrencies group. Today, we are starting a really exciting three-part series on being a mutual fund board member, what it takes, how to design your roadmap, and tips on navigating the board interview. Joining me today for the first part in this series is a very experienced panel of board members. First, we have Dina Tantra. She is an independent board director for Boston Trust Walden Funds, Heartland Funds, and Thornburg Income Builder Opportunities Trust. Next, we have Jody Foster, an independent trustee for Diamond Hill Funds and Husband Funds, and Lorianne Kloppenberg, independent trustee for the Transamerica Funds and independent director for the Adams Funds, ADX, and PEO. Ladies, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me this morning. I know this is going to be a great discussion.
Thanks for having us.
So today, in the first of this three-part series, we are going to take a deeper dive into what it takes to serve on a fund board, including what it means to be a fund board director, how to take that leap or transform from management or a service member onto a board, and how to stay at the top of your game once you do have that seat at the table. We are also hoping today's discussion will be interactive. So if you have any questions, please submit them through the chat, and we will look to address them during the course of our conversation. So please feel free to jump in with those. If you have a comment, once again, that's on the right-hand side of your screen. So, and we'll promise to try to follow up on any questions that we don't get to during our time together today. We've only got about 30 minutes. So with that, let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do is just do a quick intro of what it means to be on a mutual fund board. I think most of the people attending are probably aware of that, but at the highest level, there's this fiduciary obligation that goes into serving on a fund board. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on the duties of the independent trustee or the independent director. Oftentimes, there's someone from management who might also sit on the board of the fund, but that's not really what we're going to be addressing here. So in terms of approvals, I mean, at the highest level, you have the 15C, which is the approval and renewal of advisory and sub-advisory agreements. We'll get into that in a little bit of detail later on in the conversation. You have the approval of all of the service providers. When you have a trust and a fund, there are legal counsel, auditors, distributors, TA, ops types people, all those administrative folks that go into the mix, as well as brokers, etc. So there's a lot of information to cover. And as most of you are probably aware, there's a regular schedule for those types of approvals. And so because of that, boards in effect really have to meet at least quarterly. Oftentimes they might meet more frequently depending on the number of funds in the trust, or there are also different committees that might require additional meetings throughout the year. So it is a big commitment. It's a pretty big time commitment. And there is a lot of experience and expertise needed. One of the things that we'd like to talk a little bit about today is diversity on the board. And because of that, diversity can mean a lot of different things. It can be with respect to gender, race, but also with respect to duties and responsibilities, what kind of experience the various board members have. All of that goes into building a successful board that can be diverse and effective. So I'd like to go ahead and move over to Dina first. Dina is going to talk to us about the transition from being a service provider to an independent trustee. Dina has been in the mutual fund industry for many, many years. And Dina, I'll let you talk about your experience.
Great. Thank you, Cassandra. And thank you to Thompson Hine for hosting us. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I was mentioning all of us, Lorianne, Jody, and I have so many lived experiences, even in our shorter board careers, that we could probably talk for at least a couple hours, and we are cognizant of the time. So we'll try and keep our remarks brief, but as Cassandra said, to the extent we can be interactive, we want to be here to kind of address real-time your questions. So please feel free to send those along. My remarks are really going to be focused on that transition from being in management to being an independent director. And I would say for those of you who have dialed in, and there's over 40 of you right now, most of you, I believe, are in the asset management or financial services industry. And the fact that you're dialing in means you're at least expressing an early interest in becoming a board member. You may have already started your journey. And I have good news. The Independent Directors Council released its survey results a few weeks ago. And they said out of the independent directors who were surveyed, at least 40% are from the asset management industry. So boards are really drawing from that. Another 20% are from the financial services industry. So taking the steps you're taking today is really going to help further you along. So focusing on just a couple things, maybe do's and don'ts on your journey from management into independent board. Leverage the experience that you have. You know, you bring such robust experience, whether you're coming from legal compliance, whether you're coming from ops and really working with the service providers, whether you're like Lorianne coming from the investment side. You are bringing a lot to the table. And as Cassandra talked about, the diversity of your experience is really going to bring something to the table. Ask the questions, challenge people, you know, bring new ideas, confirm standing ideas, really kind of show what your experience, how that adds value. Also, be ready to listen. I think Jody and Lorianne and I, being newer board members, you know, we kind of walk in thinking we know a lot, right? We've got some gray hair, at least I do. We've been in the industry 25 plus years. We think we know a lot, but listening first, I think, is really helpful. Jody and Lorianne, do you guys agree with that?
Yep.
I mean, it makes me think of Ted Lasso, one of my favorites, when he says, be curious, not judgmental. And I think when you bring a level of expertise, you have to be very humble to the things you don't know, be willing to learn. If you are an analyst or a portfolio manager coming in, you may have a certain way that you like to invest. And you can use that knowledge to review and oversee how your advisor is managing, but you're not responsible for the performance. So those are the types of things I think are important.
Absolutely. And as I kind of flip over into the don'ts, if you will, back to Jody's point, as a manager, I mean, fund management says you are managing the fund. It is so easy to roll up your sleeves and want to solve the problems at the table. That is one piece of advice I think you're going to have to learn as you transition is it is not your role to solve the problems. It's your role to ask the questions. And so think about as you're sort of sitting at the board table as management, think about what hat you're wearing and think about how the independent directors are interacting with each other, with you. Start to understand where they're coming from. This is a perfect time for you as managers to sort of experience how independent directors are operating and maybe kind of file away some of those lessons learned. And the only other thing I would say before I flip this over is you're doing the right things. Networking is the challenge I give to you now. Don't wait until you retire. Don't wait until you've given your notice. Start networking now. You do already know a lot of people, but they know you as fund management. How are they now starting to perceive you as maybe 3, 5, 10 years down the line? as a possible independent director. So make sure you're sort of embedding those conversations into your daily routines. So I'll stop there and kick it over to the next person. I think Lorianne, you're going from there.
Right, yes. Lorianne, I will ask you to talk about the role of the independent trustees, meeting preparation, cadence, that 15C that I mentioned earlier, and what are the most important tips that you could pass along?
Sure. And I will join Dina in thanking Thompson Hine. It's been my privilege to be here today. In terms of the role, I guess Dina covered a lot of the things that you would, and Jody, think about in terms of going from management to trustee. The role, I think, is the thing that you have to keep in mind, that you're here for the shareholders. The extent that you can help the management helps the shareholders, but it's putting the shareholder hat on. And there are really two key, well, maybe three key things that you keep in mind. How do you protect the shareholders? One is in terms of the funds that you're overseeing, what do they say they're doing? Are they really doing it? How do you know? And how do you know really would be the performance versus the benchmark. So the one thing I would say is to make sure that you understand where all of that is coming from. And in terms of, I'll just put it, I guess, in my experience, how do I try to be a good director? It's for a complex, it's keeping in touch with what they say and what they do, even as a business. So the website, what they're putting out in terms of what's going on at the company, for the funds, what are the funds? How are the funds doing? What does performance look like? What does performance look like over time? So to become aware, I'm assuming we're talking about it once you are a director. The other thing is, to the extent that you can, understand what's going on in a big picture way with the regulatory environment. We're in a period here where there's been really an extraordinary amount of new regulation. Every regulation has a potential direct impact on the funds and the funds management and the way that the funds are going to do the right thing, comply. When you get to the meetings, at least in my case, a lot of the time is spent at the beginning of the meeting with the chief compliance officer, going through all of the things that the company has to do to make sure we're doing the right thing for the shareholders. So keeping in touch with what's going on in the regulatory environment so that you can ask questions, you can kind of see what's going on before you get to an issue, let's say, I think is very helpful. In terms of the meetings, I think we talked about it a bit already, that usually there's 4 meetings a year quarterly to go through what's going on from a compliance perspective, monitoring the portfolios, monitoring the service providers. There's often an overview of at least some of your funds with their portfolio managers so that you can go a little more in depth, and the directors can get more knowledgeable, or certainly keep up to date with what's going on there. And then there's often new matters that come up. Are we launching a new fund? Are we merging a fund? Do we want to change the fees? And so that's the thing. And it depends on how big of a complex you're talking about. But that usually takes at least a day, probably maybe up to 2 days. And the 15C we touched on briefly earlier, that's the contract renewal process. And that's a whole separate meeting, and that is generally going in a deep dive on every fund that you're responsible for, making sure that you're comfortable with the performance and relative to peers. What else could shareholders be doing in this space, and are we doing what we say? And importantly, the fees versus the peers. And generally that is a very deep dive with a lot of comparisons, because at the end of the meeting, you're hoping, the company is hoping, that you're going to approve the management contracts for all of that. So keeping in touch with, the portfolios, what's going on, the performance along the way during the year really is very helpful when you get to the 15C, so that you can really hone in on the very what I would call the more nitty gritty questions of basically fee per performance versus the peers. And I'll stop, I've kind of covered in a smattering of the topics along the way here. I'll open it up to certainly Jody and Dina to see if there's more things you would want to fill in the blanks here.
I would just ask you, Lorianne, obviously being from an investment background, how does the diversity around your board table help with the 15C analysis? What are the skill sets that you really appreciate other people having that kind of complement your skills?
I was going to jump in real quickly and just for anyone who doesn't know, 15C refers to Section 15C of the Investment Company Act of 1940. There's also a seminal case called Gartenberg, and based upon those factors that have been laid out not only under the rule, but under that case and some other cases, typically counsel is preparing this 15C questionnaire, sending it to the advisor, sub-advisor, and they complete it with a lot of very detailed information, as Lorianne mentioned. And so that is provided along with the other board materials in advance of the meeting, so that the trustees can all review all of the information, come back, ask any questions. And it really is the responsibility of everyone, including the board, to make sure that you do get fulsome responses and that you cover the 7 different items that are in that Gartenberg memo. Most importantly, probably fees, performance, but also the nature of the services, compliance. As part of that process, the board is also approving. Lorianne had mentioned the CCO. The board is also approving the trust compliance policies and procedures, the code of ethics, and those of the advisors and sub-advisors to the funds.
So that's great, very helpful, Cassandra, because we certainly do all that, and given my background, it's probably not surprising that I focus more on maybe the performance and those kinds of sides of things. But that brings up a great point with respect to Dina's question. As we've mentioned, I come from the investment side, so I'm more comfortable in analyzing and thinking about those kinds of things. Transamerica, in particular, I think they did a very specific skill set matrix when they selected their directors, and we have people from compliance, a variety of backgrounds, and so that in the 15C, especially with the non-performance related questions and things we have to ask and understand as we go through the materials, it's very helpful to have people from the legal side, the operations side, the compliance side, as well as other investment people. I would say for me, coming from the investment side, the 15C was drinking from a fire hose in terms of I can understand the basics, but there is an awful lot of nitty gritty information. And Transamerica has over 100 funds, so it's a long, detailed process when you think about doing all that for a large number of funds. And we really rely on each other to get the whole team up to speed across the board on all of the funds. We're responsible, every individual is responsible for all of the funds, but I think realistically speaking, you can only be very deep in a certain number of them at a certain amount of time. Any other thoughts, Jody?
Jody, you're on mute.
That sort of goes right into my education, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, that would be great.
So thank you, Cassandra, for having us. And I can't tell you how great it is to have people like Lorianne and Dina to ask questions to when you don't know the answers. And really, when you think about your place in the industry, I always say the investment industry is a 3-legged stool. You come from the research or investment side, or potentially the operation side, or that sales and distribution side. So what I like to do is figure out which areas am I weakest at, because you will be required to know and vote on all of these issues. So there are ways today that you can learn and prepare. And I like to say I'm an expert at nothing, but I'm an aspiring expert in so many areas. So when we look at, the first thing you can do is go to advisor websites. You will find many advisors have not only product videos and webinars potentially that they've put up about just general market commentary, but you can learn about different types of strategies and potentially different investment instruments from their websites. And different products. So for example, if you are familiar and comfortable on the equity side and want to learn more about structured products, SPACs, crypto, go to the advisor websites that invest those ways. And then secondly, I like to participate and read a lot from our service providers. And most of this information that I will share with you, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to give you a list of the things I'm about to talk about. But most of these things are free, and you could do these today. So law firms like Thompson Hine put out a beautiful piece on a regular basis on things going on in the regulatory world. CPA firms, Cohen, EY, and Deloitte are a few where I participate, audit and tax issues of the day. Incredible learning. Even if you only understand 10% of what they're telling you, you're picking up some information. Compliance consulting firms also, their websites have incredible amount of data and information about what's going on, and even looking at it from a trustee perspective. Your custodian banks too that you work with potentially have educational sections on their website where you can go and learn and participate in webinars. And then lastly, Dina, Lorianne, and I participate in a lot of industry groups. There are communities online like Board Prospects. There's a group, the NASDAQ Center for Board Excellence. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and other firms have organizations within their companies that look for and educate board members for a lot of their investment banking deals. And then from an industry perspective, the Mutual Fund Directors Forum, ICI, IDC, they are pretty much my lifeblood of education. On a weekly basis, I'm participating and learning. I do not sit on a board with ETFs today, but I go to the webinar and I learn about ETFs, the challenges they have, crypto, cannabis, all of these things, even if they don't directly relate to your board, it's important to understand what's going on in the industry, the regulatory changes, and how that may affect your advisor or firms that you're looking at to join their boards. So I would say I have been overwhelmed with the educational opportunities that we all have to be better board members. And then it's also humbling to realize how much you don't know and have to learn.
There's definitely a lot of great information out there. And typically as part of those board meetings, there is some sort of educational component, as you referenced, whether it be, counsel to the trust and the independent trustees, providing a regulatory update, bringing in special speakers to address a topic that's of particular interest to the board. Once again, the board can request those types of things, in particular education where they think it's warranted, whether it be a new product that's coming into the trust, a new type of fund, or any other issue of the day. There have been so many, as Lorianne alluded to, with all of the new rules, changing rules, etc., that have been coming our way in the last few years.
Just to jump in on that point, one of the questions I get a lot is, should I get some sort of certificate? Would that sort of accelerate my eligibility to serve on a board? For example, there are ESG certificates or cybersecurity certificates. And to Jody's point, things are changing and evolving so quickly. Our boards are talking about artificial intelligence. I'm not even sure if you got some sort of certificate on AI that it wouldn't be out of date in the next year. So my advice to you would be to do what Jody's talking about, to, to learn and keep learning, but don't try and become the designated expert in a certain field, because it's hard to keep up, especially if you have a day job. When you do retire and are pursuing independent boardship, sort of in this next phase of your career, you also need to stay in touch with things, because it's easy to sort of not be working and not be in the throes of the newsletters and the conferences and the webinars. And so Jody's point is especially true for people who have stepped away from their roles, and to make sure you're being proactive in the education, because the speed of change is just accelerating. We see it with SEC regulations, we see it with technology, and you've got to do what you can to keep up.
I sort of think of it as I have 3 children and I'm not supposed to have a favorite. I may have a favorite, but I can't say I have a favorite. So if
Not on this recording, you can't.
No, but of that 3-legged stool, there's always going to be one part where we're going to feel more comfortable. And so you have to be open to learning those other pieces so you can be more valuable around the table. And I have found, I don't know for Lorianne and Dina if you would say this is true, for people sometimes outside of the industry or outside of that expertise, they come in with a fresh set of eyes and ask very obvious questions that we haven't even thought about. So I think it really does help to learn a little bit about a lot of things.
Absolutely. And I wanted to thank Patrick Carolan for his comment. Having been an independent director, he wanted to echo Dina's advice about the natural tendency to try to fix the issues. And that's, the board is a watchdog and an overseer, but they are not, managing the fund. And then also he mentioned networking as a great way, networking with other directors as a great way to increase your competence, get to know people, talk about issues. I know some of the things that you mentioned, Jody, there are roundtables, et cetera, where it's a safe space to discuss some pretty sensitive topics.
Yeah, Patrick has some great points. To the first part about don't try and solve. There are a lot of type A people, not only on this panel, but joining in. And our first instinct may be, yeah, I got this. I can fix this. And that really isn't our role. Kathy Barr on the William Blair Funds always talks about noses in, fingers out. That is the board's role. It is a transition to do noses in, fingers out. And I challenge all of you as you're preparing for board meetings today as management, as you're sitting in board meetings, to just think about how would you respond if you were in that independent role? I think that makes you a better person. I think it makes your board a better person. But if you can kind of practice role playing of what it would be like to be an independent director in any given situation, I think that just prepares you for those next steps.
And I think that's excellent perspective as well when you're preparing all of those materials for the board meeting, right? It's a big job on both ends. It's a big job to prepare the information. It's a big job to review the information. And just having that in top of mind as to, there's a reason that the directors are asking for this level of information. There's a reason they need to see it. And there's a reason they need to see it in a timely manner so that they can review thoroughly and ask the hard questions. I wanted to circle back real quickly on board diversity. We received a question in advance of the webinar asking about what the SEC is doing and whether or not the SEC is promoting board diversity on mutual fund boards. While there was a rule that related to mutual fund boards proposed back in 2021, haven't heard a lot on that recently. However, NASDAQ for public companies adopted a rule on board diversity. And I know some mutual fund boards have started to disclose their own information related to diversity, despite the fact that it's not required. Jody, I believe Diamond Hill Funds is among those.
Correct.
Boston Trust Walden as well.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes. So in regards to, providing that information, I know from my personal experience, there's a lot of discussions going on regarding diversity. But do either of you have a comment about, promoting that, putting that out there?
Go ahead, Lorianne. Go ahead.
I would say, I'm not aware that we publish it, but I would say there's been a conscious effort. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 8 independent trustees, 4 women, 4 men, 1 African American. The chairman of our board is African American. So I think whether there's because it's a topic, it's more, it's in the news and we're talking about it, but I think at least some boards have been thinking about these things all along for, the importance of diversity of opinion, not just of your experience, but not of your investment or your work experience, but in terms of your thought perspective.
I would just jump in. I was fortunate when I joined, I was never the only, so I was never the only woman. I was never the only person of color. So I think my boards were very intentional to create a very cohesive and collaborative dynamic. But I know, Cassandra, we're running
Yeah, I think we
short
might
on time there.
short on time. So I just real quickly wanted to remind everyone, we do have part 2 and part 3 of this series. Part 2 is actually going to be a longer conversation that will be in January, so you can keep an eye out for that. And then part 3 will be following in April. If you have additional questions, you can continue to direct them to myself or perhaps the other panel members.
Sure.
Yes, I think you can reach all of us if you don't have our direct emails through LinkedIn. I think we're all in the perspective of people helped us, and so we are absolutely willing to help the next generation.
We really appreciate. I can't thank the 3 of you enough for speaking with me this morning. And Dina, Jody, Lori Ann, all of your insights were extremely helpful. We look forward to continuing this conversation. And for those in attendance, you will be prompted to take a survey as soon as the webinar ends. So thank you to everyone for attending as well. We appreciate you taking the time.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Thank you very much. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day and stay well.